If you can give me just 11 minutes, I'll show you how to get professional sounding mixes every single time. With over 12 years of experience, tracks played on the radio worldwide, and having taught over 600 students how to do the same, I'll give you simple, powerful tips to make your music sound professional fast. But first, can you listen to these two different drum mixes? The second one is way better, right? So what did I do to make that happen? Well, in order to explain that, you actually need to imagine it this way. Imagine you have a puzzle that you're trying to put together. There's a couple different options that you have when putting this puzzle together. First, you can find the right pieces and put them all together in this one beautiful looking puzzle. It'll take a little bit, but it's definitely worth doing, unless you're somebody like me, and then you're just gonna rip your hair out halfway through and maybe just like push it all off the table. I have no patience for these kind of things. Work on music for hours and hours a day, but no patience for puzzles. Or you could just take the puzzle pieces, and if it doesn't fit the way you want it to, just cut it and force it in there. And then at the end, you're gonna have a picture that is kind of convoluted. It works, but it doesn't actually feel right. This is the same thing that I see time and time again with some of my students' mixes. The difference between the two drum mixes was the actual drum library that I used. I used a way better library for the second, and it fits the track well. If I was looking for jazz, I wouldn't play that kit. Even though that kit sounds amazing, I wouldn't use that one. I would use a jazz kit. Or if I was trying to do hip hop, I don't necessarily know if I'd use that either. So not only do you need really good sounds, you also need to make sure that the context of the sounds that you're using is also in the right context. If you're using a metal kit on a pop song, it's probably not going to work in the way you want it to. And now, hypothetically, you could force it by using EQ and compression and just forcing it into the track, but still at the end of the day, even if you still can hear everything and it is a clear mix, whatever that means, you're still not getting exactly what you're after, which is an overall picture of the song. So you're probably thinking, wow, this is great, but how do I know what actually is a good sound? You want to have some sort of reference in mind. A lot of people struggle with references, and I totally get it. So that's why I don't like to call them reference tracks. I like to call them inspiration tracks. Listen to music that you really enjoy and that you kind of take influence from, and listen to the drums on that. What kind of drums are they using? You can Google these things and figure out what libraries they're using, what sounds they're using. And then you can take all of that information and use it in your music. And it's still not going to sound like the original artist because you're still you. It's very difficult to copy somebody. If you've never tried to replicate a song one-to-one, definitely go try it. It's very difficult to replicate it. So don't get so worried about copying somebody else. You need to actually take inspiration. And if you're still fighting the idea, imagine how many people have played a Les Paul guitar. So many people have played this specific guitar, but yet it sounds different every time somebody grabs it. Don't overthink it, but you definitely need to have a vision in mind. Now, the next trick for getting great sounding mixes is understanding compression really well. Compression can be tough, and I totally understand why, but I think a lot of YouTubers and a lot of videos that I've seen online don't actually explain compression in a way that makes a lot of sense. And so, first and foremost, compression is just an automatic volume knob at its core. It is decreasing the dynamic range of a signal, or it's just turning down the loud parts. Explaining it in a way that makes a lot of sense helps us be able to actually use this to our advantage. Now, the next thing is the ratio trick. This is something that I learned from Joel Wanasek. Guy's absolutely brilliant. And it really helps to understand how to hear compression and how to actually feel compression. So that way you actually know what you're doing when you're making adjustments. Take a listen to the drums on this track. So let me pull up some compression that I actually have on this drum bus. So I'm compressing all of the drums. And this compressor here that I'm using is called a distressor. But the type of compressor doesn't matter. The ratio trick works on all of them. The reason why I do like the distressor is because the ratio goes all the way to the nuke setting. So what we want to do is we want to turn the ratio all the way up. take it as far as your compressor will allow. Then we'll make our adjustments. What this allows us to do is it allows us to zoom in on what's actually happening with the compression. It's like pulling out a magnifying glass. It exaggerates the effect so that way you can actually hear what the attack, the release, the threshold, and all of the other elements of this compressor are actually doing. Once you've got everything adjusted to where you want to, then you could zoom back out or lower the ratio and be able to blend it back in with the song. The ratio is just how aggressive the compressor is actually being. A higher ratio, the more compression is actually happening. So I'm going to turn the ratio to the nuke setting, and then we're going to play this. So you can really hear how the drums start to pop a bit more when I bring the attack up. When I slow down the attack, it's allowing some of those transients of the drums to come through. Take a listen. So let's adjust the release. So I'm really getting a lot of pump out of this drum now. So now I'm going to go back down to a 1-to-1 ratio, which is no compression at all. And I'm just going to slowly turn the ratio up until I'm starting to get that sound that I'm looking for. Using the ratio trick is such a powerful way to be able to zoom in, really exaggerate the effect so that way you can set the parameters where you want to. Then you can bring the ratio back down. This way, you're not guessing how the compressor is shaping the sound. You can actually see exactly or hear exactly what's going on and then bring the ratio back down to a more musical amount. Next up is EQ. I like to think of EQ as lighting a stage. Different instruments are like the performers on a stage. And EQ is like adjusting the lights, spotlighting all of those performers. Too much brightness or too much high end can make things sound very harsh, and too much shadow can make things sound murky. But a good balance makes sure that all the performers shine without actually creating an imbalance between all the performers. You can see them all, but no one is too bright and no one is too dark. And so this is where I deviate from the general rule of peaking frequencies to find problems and then cutting them. I'm sure you've probably seen that online, and if you haven't, the general rule of thumb is you peak frequencies, sweep around until you find problems, and then cut that out of the way. But the thing is, sometimes those frequencies are very important. A great example of this is 4K on electric guitar. Listen to how harsh this sounds. Very harsh, very aggressive, kind of painful frequency. But if we take it out, it sounds very hollow, like it's missing a lot of presence. So if we just start sweeping around for frequencies looking for problems, we're actually going to create another problem because we boosted it and found a problem. It's like over brightening somebody on stage. Well, if the solution is just to take that light out, then you're not going to see that person to begin with. So we actually don't want to sweep frequencies to find problems. We want to sweep frequencies to train our ears on what each frequency sounds like. I've really learned with my students that even just with a few hours of practicing some really solid ear training, sweeping through frequencies in a song, sweeping through frequencies on bass, guitar, drums, and other elements in a track, you really start to understand what each part of that track sounds like and what each frequency in that track sounds like. And then once you start to feel like something might be a bit too bright or a bit too dark, then you can correct it from there. But if you just start peaking frequencies and sweeping around, you're going to find problems because you're creating them. Now, if you want to know about the reverbs and delays and all that other stuff that goes along with mixing, you can watch my full vocal mixing workshop. It's free. You can just click the link down in the description, or you can just scan this QR code here. Either way, it'll take you there. It's completely free, and you even get the stems for it as well. Now, the next trick is something that a lot of people mistake, and that is saturation. Saturation is a lot like onions, and no, not because it has layers. It actually has to do with the process of cooking the onions. If you slowly cook onions in a pan, they start to caramelize, and they develop a deep and rich flavor instead of sounding so raw. Saturation does the same thing by breaking down the sound subtly to create depth and character. Listen to how these guitars start to come to life when I add a bit of saturation to them. Nothing else, just a bit of saturation. it kind of brings them up just a little bit. It's subtle, but it's definitely a pretty decent difference. What saturation does is it adds harmonic frequencies onto a sound that's already there. And certain types of saturation plugins will actually allow you to add second or third harmonics to the sound. So let me actually show you what this is doing in context. So here I'm playing a sine wave, which is the purest tone known to man. It is just one pure tone. Now, as I start to add saturation, watch what happens to the harmonic frequencies that are now being generated from saturation. And so this is a great way to get bass to cut through phone speakers because you're adding some more harmonic frequencies on top of what's already there. And most phones actually shut off around 300 hertz, which if you're watching this from your phone, this probably just came to life for you. Going too far obviously causes problems, but going a little bit can add such rich and depth to any track you add it on. I use this on vocals, on drums, on guitars, on synths, on so many things. And you can't even go aggressive with it and be very creative with the process. Now, one of the biggest mixing mistakes that I see happen all the time is not necessarily mixing. It's actually what happens before mixing. And so that's why I made this video here, which is some producing tricks that the pros don't want their clients to know. And I know this because I used to kind of keep these things as secrets as well. So you're definitely going to want to give that video a watch. I'll see you over there. And now, as always, go create.